r/Nosleep. Posted by u/Mr_Mojo_Rising95. I started a new job as a overnight security guard at a private cemetery. The previous guard gave me list of rules which I can't comprehend. Part 1. Hello all, my name is Henry and I recently graduated college for graphic design. While I am waiting and applying for jobs, I took up a job that was advertised in our local grocery store for an overnight security guard at a private cemetery near the town's border. I called the number, spoke with a woman who gave me very brief details. What took me by surprise was the pay, $30 an hour for a 10-hour shift. At this point in my life, I needed to cash to scrape by before I landed something in my field. The woman told me to be there by 7 p.m., where my 10-hour shift would start at that time. I pulled into the cemetery, which was about a 25-minute drive from my house, through a narrow dirt road. The outskirts of town were less developed than where my house was, the trees were thick and dense, it darkened quick here. Further down the road, narrowly avoiding potholes, I approached a rusty old gate, covered in hanging moss. I drove through the open gate, going deeper into the wooded area, darkness circling in on me. The graves began to pop up one by one, big ones, dull ones, broken ones, immaculate sculpted ones. They littered the open field where I could see as far in as the trees would allow. With nightfall approaching, I hated to say it but I was already getting the creeps. The road stretched long and windy. I was instructed by the woman to follow the path till I reached a tiny hut, hard to miss. Soon enough, I made it to the tiny hut in the middle of the cemetery. It was dimly lit, with a janky roof. Inside, a security guard popped his head up from the desk, looked like he must have nodded off for a few hours. I parked my car along what appeared to be his. He met me outside as I exited my car. The evening air was getting crisp. I felt goosebumps along my arms and neck. I was greeted by the middle-aged guard. He looked tired, heavy bags on both eyes. We exchanged brief greeting while he hastily made his way to his car. Before he got in, he turned back towards me, his eyes a little more awake and alert than before. He looked at me and asked, "Wait, you're not new, are you?" I looked back a little puzzled. "Yeah, today's my first night, a little uneasy." "Fuck, alright, take this," the man replied. He handed me a laminated piece of paper from within his backpack. As I took it, I noticed his hand seemed a little shaky. "Are you okay, man?" I asked him. Again he looked at me, alert, almost scared. "Just read that guy and stick by them, we can't afford to lose another one." He calmly spoke, a tiny crack in his voice. "Lost another one?" I questioned. "Like I said, guy, follow the rules and stay safe out here." The man got in his car and speed off. His tires peeling off, rustling up the dirt from the road. I stood there pretty weirded out, grabbed my backpack and laminated paper and headed inside the hut. The hut was lit by a single low-hanging lamp. I nearly smacked my head on it. There was a rickety-looking stool, an old wooden desk where an even older ham radio sat next to an AC tray. I placed my bag on the table and got as comfortable as I could. It was sitting there at that moment when I noticed how quiet it was. While there's trees and wildlife by my part of town, this was more remote. I had figured there'd be more wildlife out here, but nothing. Quiet, not even a cricket. Quiet and cold, yet not a single light I could see out in the distance. The hut was smack in the middle of this private circular cemetery. The owner lived up on the hill up the road. What I found out was in the winter, when the trees are dead and you could see further through them, you can see the mansion the owner lives in, and if you are lucky, you can watch him stare down at the cemetery. While it was not winter, I was surrounded by darkness. The hut barely lit up the area around me. A few feet in each direction of the hut was an unmarked grave, old-looking, all bent out of shape. While I scanned my limited horizon, I nearly jumped out of my skin when the ham radio began to go off. Static creaked to life and faint voice broke through. I fumbled around with the receiver when a woman's voice came through clear. I recognized her voice as the one that I spoke with from before. She was stoic and not very forgiving. Before I could answer, she spoke, "Read the instructions and do not stray from them. If you do not have the paper or lose it, text me and I will send you a picture of it. Your life may depend on it. Your shift will end in 10 hours where you will be relieved of your duties then. Good night." Just as quickly as she came through, her end clicked out. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. 2 months' pay in advance has been wired to your bank account. My phone buzzed again. An email from my bank for a recent deposit. I stared wide-eyed at the large deposit I had just gotten. This job had got to be too good to be true. While I ruminated over my phone, my attention was cut short by a rock thrown at the hut's window. My head shot up, nothing but the few graves around me. Weird. Back to my phone, scrolled those some emails. Checked my account once or twice more. Then again, clank, something hit the glass. I stared out to the voided darkness around me. I couldn't see further out than 10 feet in either direction. My stomach was beginning to get a little uneasy at this point, and the woman's warning was beginning to creep back into my head. Why would my life depend on it? Harder and harder I ruminated over her warning, while I stared out into the cemetery. Something caught my attention in my peripherals. Something running, something quick, dashed into the darkness, quiet. My heart was beginning to race, the darkness was playing tricks on me. That's when I gave a look at the laminated paper. Shakily I held the paper up, it was a badly wrinkled and browning. It was headed with the cemetery's address, which I will not say, but under the address, listed rules, numbered 1 to 10. 1. Do not investigate any ringing bells, no matter how close they sound, they aren't. 2. If bugs start landing on the hut's glass window, burn the candles that are under the desk till your shift's end. 3. If pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. 4. If gravestones begin to appear and reappear, go outside and pour oil over them, oil located under the desk. 5. If a gravedigger comes, do not approach him, let him come to the window, he will stare at you for a few hours but will leave after, do not go outside while he's here. 6. Do not venture out past the great angel grave under any circumstance. 7. Do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio except for the initial call when you came in. 8. Lock the hut after each time you step outside. 9. Do not leave for the bathroom for more than 10 minutes at a time, if you have to, come back, wait, then go back. 10. If at any point you return to the hut, and see someone else sitting in the hut, get in your car and drive off. I placed the paper down, still trying to process everything that was happening. Who wrote this? Why do I need to follow them? Is this some kind of joke? While I ruminated over my endless thoughts, something clanked against the glass window. Wait a second, I thought, I just read this. If pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. Fuck. I dived for the light switchy, clicked it off and raced under the desk. The hut was cold, I was starting to see my breath now. I zipped my hoodie up and tried to keep my heart from beating out of my chest. Again a pebble hit the glass, again and again, each time my stomach stinking. Then came the laughing. A faint, little girl laugh coming from outside the hut. I clasped my mouth shut, trying not to make a sound. Louder and louder the girl's laugh grew till I thought it was in my head. The pebbles came harder. The girl's laugh continued for about 30 minutes. While it went quiet, I peeked my head from under the desk. It was still. A light fog was hovering among the field, with the moon's glow illuminating the area. I saw nothing, quietness. I waited in the darkness of the hut for the remainder of the night. The sun began to come up and my nerves calmed a bit. In the morning I was able to see more out into the vast cemetery. Soon the car from before pulled up. The man I met when I started got out and asked for the paper. Before I could say anything he looked up, groggy-eyed, and said, "You're lucky you don't have the morning rules." He walked away, nodded and closed himself into the hut. That was a long drive home, lots to think about. I climbed into bed and desperately tried to sleep. My second shift was about to start later that evening. Hello all, thank you for all the concerns. I think I am being watched right now, I feel like they are closing in on me. Before I tell you where I am, let me tell you about my second shift at the private cemetery. After my first night, I went home and slept for about 30 minutes. So many thoughts were racing through my head. I knew what I heard, there was no mistaking the laughing. While I vaguely believe in the paranormal, I know what I heard. I looked over the list a few more times when I was home, each time sounding more crazier than the last. I looked up the cemetery online and found little information about it. Everything about this place sounded like a mystery. As the day winded down, I barely realized that I hadn't slept much since getting back from my first shift and I was 8 coffees deep. Tonight was going to be a long night. I packed my backpack, brought some snacks and headed out. Like before, the narrow dirt path was empty as the sun began to settle behind the treetops. Ravens cawed and flew overhead as I descended deeper into the woods towards the cemetery. I approached the familiar steel gate. Ravens rested on top of the sharp-studded spikes that lined the length of the rusty gate. While I pulled into the cemetery, I noticed it wasn't as quiet as the other night. No, I was hearing something, sirens. I drove along the winding path, where my view of the hut was obscured by a dozen of police cars and ambulances. I froze panicking in my car. A cold sweat was running down my neck as I watched 2 paramedics wheel out a large black bag. Besides the hut, was the same car that was here yesterday, except its front window was caved in like someone threw a bowling ball through it. I only figured the red had to be blood. The paramedics wheeled out what appeared to be a body bag. My mind was racing while I tried to swallow the dry lump in my throat. I nearly jumped out of my skin when a nearby officer tapped his baton on my window. He motioned for me to roll down my windows. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking. "Sir, if you do not work here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," the officer sternly asked. I shakily responded, I do work here. What is going on?" Wiping my clay hands against my pant legs. "Sir, there has been an accident here. Tell me now, do you know this gentleman?" The officer handed me a picture of the morning security guard. He looked tired in the picture like he did the other night. Again, I thought he must not get enough sleep. My mind flashed back to the minutes of sleep I racked up in the previous 2 days. "Yes, I do. Is that him over there?" pointing towards the body bag that was being wheeled into the ambulance. "It is, son. Like I said, there had been an accident. Did you happen to have any ongoing contact with him?" "Robert the First, think his name was?" the cop asked, leaning more into my car, his eyes scanning the back of my seats. "No, I barely spoke to him. Yesterday was my first day on the job. He is supposed to relieve me of my shift in the morning while I do him for the evening," I shakily replied, my voice cracking a bit. The cop fumbled in his pocket. His suit was pressed sharply and his muscles bulged from his arms. "Son, why don't you take my card? We may have some more questions for you in a bit. You said you relieve him of his shift in the evening. I'm assuming you're here in front of me now about to do just that. While I can't say exactly what, I will suggest that you be careful tonight, son. I ain't never seen anything like what happened to that boy in years. If I wasn't already on the verge of shitting my pants, what he told me made me close." I put his card in my back pocket and rolled up my window. The officer pointed me along where I parked alongside Robert's car. The bowling ball-shaped hole in the windshield pointed inwards, like something was thrown through it from the outside. The jagged remainders of glass were painted red. A tow truck lifted the car onto its bed. The ambulances began to drive off and soon I was alone along the hut. The last to leave was the officer I spoke to before. He stood along his driver's side door, met my gaze and nodded slowly before getting in and driving off. Before I could collect my thoughts, my phone vibrated. Another text message came in which read an additional months of advance pay had been transferred into my bank account. Soon enough, I got an email to confirm just that. I started to think I was going crazy now, either from lack of sleep or fright. My mind started racing. Could the Robert have died from not following the rules? What made the hole in his car? I reluctantly grabbed my bag and headed inside the hut. Before I could sit down, the ham radio began going off. It was only a couple minutes after my shift started. "Hello," I answered, clearing my throat. "Glad to see you back. Such a shame about Robert. He was with us for 3 years," a woman answered. "I'm sure you got the bank statement sent to you." I nodded like she could see that. "Good. Well, think of it as payment for seeing Robert go out like that. Just keep quiet and more rewards will be sent your way." The receiver clicked off. Great, I thought, having to keep quiet just because I am getting paid off. I had to think about it. I had all night to wonder about Robert, as well as what I could do with the money now. While I rhymed over the endless possibilities of what to buy, I refreshed myself on the rules of the night which were neatly placed on the desk ready for me. 1. Do not investigate any ringing bells, no matter how close they sound. They aren't. 2. If bugs start landing on the hut's glass window, burn the candles that are under the desk till your shift's end. 3. If pebbles are thrown at the hut's glass, turn the light off and hide under the desk till the laughing stops. 4. If gravestones begin to appear and reappear, go outside and pour oil over them, oil located under the desk. 5. If a gravedigger comes, do not approach him, let him come to the window. He will stare at you for a few hours but will leave after. Do not go outside while he's here. 6. Do not venture out past the great angel grave under any circumstance. 7. Do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio except for the initial call when you came in. 8. Lock the hut after each time you step outside. 9. Do not leave for the bathroom for more than 10 minutes at a time. If you have to, come back, wait, then go back. 10. If at any point you return to the hut, and see someone else sitting in the hut, get in your car and drive off. Before long, a couple hours passed by, and I was starting to feel the effects of only limited sleep from before. I sucked down 2 Red Bulls within those first few hours. Time seemed to stand still when the sun went down. The cemetery was swallowed by darkness and the world went quiet. Soon I was face to face with just the few graves I could see in front of me. I counted each to make sure I appeased rule number 4. While I struggled to stay awake, I was jolted up by the sound of the receiver from the radio going off. It hummed alive and struggled to catch a signal. I reactively went to grab it when I stopped myself short. Number 7. I read the list again. Sure enough, number 7, Do not answer anyone talking from the ham radio except for the initial call when you came in. I held back and waited for the receiver to end. What seemed like an eternity, the receiver continued until a faint raspy voice began to speak from within the static. Hello, the voice from the receiver called out. I sat nervously in front of the receiver, my watch read 10 p.m. Hello, drawn out the voice came in, more masculine each time. I tried to distract myself, I counted the graves, 6, just like last time. Then, the receiver went out, the static stopped. I let out my breath, which I didn't even realize I was holding. I looked out into the cemetery, zoning out a bit when something caught my attention. Trying to focus on my faint reflection in the glass, it looked like something was behind me. I froze up, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I squinted harder, trying to focus on the black shape in the dull reflection. When I gathered enough courage, I swiftly turned around, bracing for the worst. Nothing. Again, I let out a sigh of relief. The receiver shot to life with ear-piercing static hello. The man's voice roared out. Hello. 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 Each time the voice shrieked higher in pitch. Hello. 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 Sounding like a demented clown who sucked too much helium. My ears were ringing, I plugged them and shut my eyes tight, then silence. The receiver clicked off. I held tight for a few moments, before I opened. I was alone. I scooted back from the radio and rested my head on the desk, tears were bubbling in the corner of my eyes. Before I could wallow in fright, my bladder began to hurt when I realized I really needed to pee. This was something I was hoping I didn't have to do, but the 8 coffees all day and 2 quick Red Bulls weren't doing me any favors. I reluctantly sat up, zippered my hoodie and braced myself to go outside. The porta potty was about 20 feet from the hut, right next to a massive oak tree with big spiderweb-looking branches full of thick leaves. As I stepped outside the hut, Rule 9 echoed in my head, 10 minutes I got, don't forget to lock the door. I locked the door behind me and sped walk to the porta potty. I reached it in seconds, slamming the plastic door behind me and frantically reached my zipper. Waiting to pee, I started hearing rustling outside. The porta potty was dark, not a light except for the moonlight peering through the hole on the corner roof. I started to pee, despite the rustling growing louder. 2 minutes since I started, plenty of time. I finished peeing and pushed the door open, 7 minutes to spare. I raced out and made my way towards the hut. I was stopped short when a ringing bell caught my ear. Ding, a bell went off in the darkness. I checked my watch, a little under 7 minutes to spare. I stopped and peered into the black void of the cemetery, the ding came again, only sounding closer. That dry lump in my throat was coming back. I felt an unseen force try to lull me into the darkness, the ding came once again. I took a step towards it. I stopped, listened, ding, a bell rang towards my right, I could have sworn it was to my left a minute ago. Again, I felt the force pull me closer, it was comforting. Ding, the bell rang, this time straight ahead. I nearly toppled over a gravestone that was broken half. It was old, thick moss was growing on the side of it. I crouched down and felt the cold stone on the palm of my hand. I tried to make out the header. I squinted, shining my phone light onto the grave. Robert, it read. A sharp pain seized up my body, and my mind flashed back to Robert being wheeled out in a body bag. The bell rang again, towards my right, then again, towards my left, then again to the front, then to behind me, then above me. I frantically searched around, looking for the source. That's when it hit me. I wasn't supposed to leave for more than 10 minutes. I had been gone for 8 minutes when I checked my phone. I didn't realize how far I had wandered from the porta potty. I raced back the way I came, slamming my knees into gravestone I swore were not there when I first came. My shin rang in pain and I felt a warm trickle of blood race down my leg. I could barely see a few feet in front of me through the darkness. The hut was in sight, its bright luminous glow in a sea of darkness. I raced along, checking my phone from my pocket, got 1 minute. Then, I smashed into another gravestone, this one a bit bigger. My phone sprang from my hand towards the side into the darkness. My knee screamed in pain as I felt the electric hot pain surge through my body while I crashed into the grass. With a bolt of adrenaline, I leapt up and raced towards the hut. I had to have had only seconds left. That's when I realized I left my phone. I stopped at the hut door, unlocked it and looked back. I couldn't see it, but I know I dropped it. I couldn't take a chance. I went inside and saw the extent of my knee, a bright red gash right on my kneecap, my pants stained red. I sat at the desk and dressed my wound as much as I could. Checking my watch became an ingrained memory at that point. How could I have been so dumb? Why didn't I just check my watch? Cursing at my own stupidity, I was brought back to reality by a little clank against the glass. I froze in place. Did I hear what I just heard? Then again, a clang, a pebble hit the glass. I dove for the lights, and before I could dive under the desk I met the gaze of a figure in the cemetery. It stood in the darkness, its eyes glowing yellow. I stood frozen by this being, its eyes seeming to pulsate from within the darkness. Within a moment's flash, something smashed into the glass, my phone. My phone was stuck in the glass half in my side as sparks shot out from it. From within the darkness, a hellish shriek came. I dove under the desk as the earth thudded and vibrated around me. It sounded like a bear was prowling out there. Then the laughing started. The little girl's laugh came in waves, then the ground would shake like an earthquake, feeling like the whole hut would come down. I sat in the fetal position with my eyes shut. The girl's laugh became more sinister and less human while the ground erupted around me. When I peeked out, bright yellow lights pulsated from within the darkness of the cemetery. I dove back under for safety and waited. I waited and waited, eventually having to piss myself as the yellow lights and vibrating ground continued for hours. For what felt like an eternity, until day began to rise. My shift was nearing an end, but who was going to relieve my duty, I thought. As the sun shone higher, I gathered enough courage to come out from under the desk. My bloodied legs stiffened sharp with pain. I let out a yelp, and winced over. My phone lodged within the glass, I was unable to pry it out. An old silver Cadillac began to pull up the road, its windows tinted black. It raced along, dragging up clouds of dirt. I figured this must be the new morning guy. As I stepped out of the hut, took in the morning air and noticed my back tires were both slashed. Not having any spares, I had to get home. The Cadillac pulled up alongside me and a pimply-faced teen came out. He was led to the hut without saying a word or acknowledging me by a tall woman with bright red hair and big dark sunglasses, her skin as white as milk. She met my gaze and nodded slowly. Maybe she is the one who contacts me on the radio, I thought. Too exhausted to care, I gathered my things and limped towards my car. I could see the woman talking to the teen outside the hut. She was holding the laminated rules in her hand. My car painstakingly kicked to life while I carefully rode down the path on 2 flats. I got home, with nearly my rims destroyed, and changed the tires quickly. I took a long shower, cleaned my wounds and crashed into bed. I awoke later in the afternoon, did my daily ritual and prepared for my 3rd shift. My leg was sore and achy. I wrapped it tight and took a couple of Advils. Before I headed out for my car, my phone began to ring. "Hello?" I answered. "Nothing." "Hello again," I called. "You broke some rules, Henry, did you?" My mind raced back to later last night, all the horrific memories pouring back. I didn't? Or I thought I followed them, what now?" I screamed out. "Get to the cemetery," the woman calmly spoke. "I'll explain." With my bag already packed, I raced towards my car and frantically sped down the road. Night was already approaching, much quicker than usual. The streets were empty and the air felt hot. A murder of crows swarmed overhead like a massive school of fish. I had a sick feeling bubbling in my stomach.